This is an amazing thing happening. I've observed Pune is the largest non-capital city of India, and therefore probably the most appropriate place for creating discourses and generating discourses on public policy. Before I start the session and invite our esteemed guests, I thought I'll show you a few graphs that might pep our interest a little bit in public policy. This is the Google Ngram graph. So this, what it does is it basically looks at how many times has this string public policy appeared in any text that has been digitized by Google. And you can see that there's increasing. But interestingly, if you compare it with public administration and public affairs, I mean, the idea of public policy has generated significant interest in the West, but particularly in the late 20th century. What happens in India is truly amazing in terms of interest in public policy. I mean, the festival itself shows this, and we'll dwell on it a little bit. But let me show you another one. This is the search, the Google trend search, people searching public policy in Google for the past 12 months. So 100 here means the highest number of search. So it doesn't tell you the number of searches. So the last 1 year, 2023, this is the interest in the word public policy by people who are just typing public policy in Google to find out what is public policy after all. Right? It's a fairly new discipline. But interestingly, you see the interest of public policy is coming from which parts of India? By and large, dominated by places in Northeast, which, by the way, is equally important public policy, even though kind of often, because of geographic terrain, these Himalayan states. So relatively unusual spaces where people are looking for what is public policy. When I see this across the last 5 years, this has been the trend of interest in public policy in Google. And look at the countries where public policy is being searched by people globally. And most of them come from eastern and southeastern parts of Africa. So in some ways, public policy has picked up an interest. And I think it's extremely important for us to get a sense of what's really going on in this discipline and probably talk to some of the experts in the field. I'd like all of you to give a big hand to our guest today, Professor Mark Hallerberg and Clara Péron, who's here with us. I'd like to invite both of you to the stage. Professor Hallerberg is a professor at Hertie School, which until recently used to be called as Hertie School of Governance. Probably one of the first schools in Germany working on public policy. You could probably take seats wherever. Okay. After this, yeah. He has been working. I mean, he has also led a lot of leadership positions within Hertie School, including being the dean, as well as the director of the Master's Public Policy Program. His research interests span across fiscal governance, tax, financial crisis, and even European Union politics. He has advised a range of large institutions, including Ernst & Young, Poland, European Central Bank, German Corporation for International Cooperation, and Inter-American Development Bank. His doctorate was in political science from UCLA. Can I welcome Professor Mark Hallerberg formally? Well, we have with us a practitioner with more than 20 years of experience across both public and private sphere. We'd like to welcome Ms. Clara Péron. She has, her career began in Canadian Foreign Services, and she has worked in the Canadian Foreign Service postings in India, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Djibouti. So it's across Africa and India. She graduated from Public Policy School in Harvard, Kennedy School of Government in 2008. And then she moved to Berlin to pursue a management consulting career. She was working with Boston Consulting Group, engaging in a range of industrial sectors. But in 2014, she founded this consulting firm / think tank called Value for Good in Berlin. And she built a team of more than 30 social impact consultants. They focus on advising, empowering, and inspiring organizations across the public, private, and non-profit sectors. Warm welcome to you, Clara, as well. So what we'll do is we'll get back to our we'll resume the conversation on an interesting panel called Learning Public Policy. Just by a show of hands, maybe we can ask people, how many of you are here? How many students are here in this audience? Wow. So there you go. And we were earlier thinking to ask you, why did you join public policy? But there's a large number to deal with. So let me run straight into the discussion. Perhaps I can sit there and we can have an informal conversation. Good. So, Mark, Clara, thanks a lot for being here. I think the first question that, there are more than half the hall is full of students, is understanding. So, public policy is a fairly nascent, really new discipline, definitely in India and even outside India, perhaps. Um, Mark, if you could give us an idea in terms of what is going on in terms of public policy schools emerging in the world. You could take examples from Hertie or even in India. And Clara, perhaps you could add on what are these students doing after doing public policy? You yourself did Masters of Public Policy in Kennedy. So why do these public policy schools exist to begin with? In fact, I would imagine many people here who are engaging in public policy don't really have a public policy degree, but have degrees from economics, political science, sociology, and others. And yet we have these public policy schools here. So, Mark, would you like to throw some light on it?
I'd be happy to. And first of all, thank you to the organizers for inviting me here and also for the opportunity to speak with you. In fact, I look forward to some dialogue at the end of this session. I should say, you might say, oh, public policy, I come from Germany. I'm not German, that's another thing we could talk about. But in terms of public policy, what is it, how does it work? I should say this was a question that you got in Germany 20 years ago. And indeed, I come from a public policy school, the Hertie School, that's celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. And I think if I say just a few things about why we exist, that might then help to answer your question. One part of this is if you look historically at Germany, who do you find in different ministries? And let me just start in the public sector. Well, if you look in the public sector, what you overwhelmingly find are lawyers. If you wanted to become an official, and by the way, there's a lot of respect in Germany for officials or Beamten for all sorts of reasons. Well, you went to law school. You spent a lot of time in law school, and then you might end up, say, in the finance ministry. You might be working on economic matters, but your training was very much in law. Well, if you look at policy problems, I'd say this is always the case, but especially now, in the 21st century, you have what the field would refer to as so-called wicked problems. Problems that are incredibly complex, that have many different facets. Okay? If I look at these wicked problems, to analyze them from one perspective, you'll learn something, but you get a lot more if you have multiple perspectives. And what policy schools do is that you get some economics, you do get some law, because you have to understand how the legal system works, but you also get a little bit of political science, maybe even sociology, anthropology, and especially in the last few years, a lot of data science. Because indeed, there are wonderful things we can do to address what's happening in public policy through data science. But this then, as I just described, is something that's multidisciplinary, not single discipline. I have one more bit to this. I talked about what's happening intellectually, why you might want these developments, but I think you also have to look at the shape of problems and who can address them. Because indeed, what I found fascinating about what you showed in terms of this trend about the decline in public affairs is it's not just the public sector that solves the world's problems. There are a lot of things that are happening in the private sector. Okay, there are a lot of things that happen in the third sector with NGOs and with others. And I think that understanding was missing in traditional programs that focus just on public administration. Because this is much more than public administration. This is dealing with public policy and trying to deal with different sorts of problems. And so I fear I'm talking too much. To wrap up, you ask a very long question in some ways. In terms of where do our students end up, you might be surprised to hear that a public policy school, I think it's around 55% of our students end up in the private sector. Okay, a lot of our students end up working on, it might be that they're working in a public affairs department at, say, Google or at some sort of big firm. It might be they're working more in different sorts of NGOs. A lot of our students, in fact, enjoy Berlin and stay in Berlin and work in different sorts of NGOs in the area, but many, of course, go someplace else. And I should say only about a third of our students are German. 2/3 are from elsewhere, and indeed, I know some of our students are even in the room right now. In terms of backgrounds, students often don't just stay in Berlin, they go back home, and they do different things there. So I hope I addressed your question.
Of course, this is great. In fact, as an added information, like in Germany, civil servants come from law background. In India, civil servants are mainly generalists, so they can be doing anything in their UG, undergraduate, and then they move to become civil servants. For instance, Pardeshi sir is an economist, and now he's doing many other things. Clara, would you like to chime in terms of, like, you've had experience in studying public policy, and then of course engaging in public and private sectors. So how does this education of public policy, so to speak, converge towards the experiences that you've had, for instance, across the world?
Exactly. So I think it's good timing. I just had my 15-year alumni reunion from the Harvard Kennedy School. So it's really interesting to see what people are doing today. So just to kind of continue the path of what ends up happening to those people who studied public policy, like you here in the room. Many different things happen to them. And I think one has to think about why one is initially motivated to study public policy. And I think it's basically an MBA for people who are intrinsically motivated to make the world a better place, right? That's what a master's in public policy is. You have some soft skills that are taught to you, but you have some hard skills like economics, statistics, etc. But it's really about becoming the managers of a better world. And so those people go into all the sectors because every sector has a role to play in making the world a better place. And I agree with you, Mark. Actually, the statistics at Harvard are very similar. I'd say more than 50% went into the private sector. A mix of consulting, private equity was also a big one. I mean, that is also like investing in the future in a certain sense. But then a good big share actually went into the public sector, and I'd say so probably like 25%, 30%, and then a good 20% went into journalism, civil society, NGO work, etc. And people's paths, and I think this is the other common thing, people's paths haven't all been linear. So I think that's the neat thing about an MPP degree. You can actually navigate and explore a lot. And that's what I did, because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had actually, before studying public policy, done public policy in government and realized, oh, maybe I'm not doing the right thing. So I studied, and then I pivoted to private sector, and now I'm back on the kind of social impact side of things. But it is a journey, also realizing, because in the end, it's about what impact could you have given your own skill set, your own strengths, your own passion, and you need to explore that. So, and the first step isn't always the one that will be the one that you will take forever.
Thanks. So there are two interesting points coming out. So Mark is talking about interdisciplinarity or multidisciplinarity nature of public policy, and Clara mentions the non-linearity of the career after public policy. And so these two things, I think, talk to each other. So let me get a show of hands from here. And both of them mentioned more than 50% of students in Hertie or in Harvard who do public policy go to private sector. How many of the students here want to join private sectors after doing your public policy courses? All right, so that's almost like less than half. How many of you would like to join the public sector, the government, after doing your public policy courses? Now, this is interesting, right? So in India, people who are doing public policy are by and large thinking about engaging with government more directly. So in a way, so I think what I'd like to do is, if you could shed some light on, people think that this multidisciplinary nature of public policy means that it is rather a cocktail of social sciences disciplines and humanities disciplines, or I should say mocktail perhaps in this, right? So you have some courses from economics, some courses from political science, some from sociology, some from philosophy, and then, sort of curating them in such a way that people get some perspective of the discipline. But I also know both of you believe that it is an extremely applied discipline. It's a hugely practice-driven subject, unlike others, so these social sciences. So would you like to talk a little bit about that? Because, I think this...
I mean, I could start, because that was my biggest surprise. I was, started at the Kennedy School, and I was all thinking I'm going to do econ nonstop and learn about, education, policy, what works, what doesn't in X country. But actually 50% of my classes were skills-based. So that means negotiation classes, right? Because if you do a policy, how are you going to get it implemented if you don't know how to negotiate? So that's really critical. Communication skills, how to write well, how to blog well, how to bring your message across succinctly, compellingly to the right audience. Then this whole kind of change management, right? These are like management concepts. So we had courses on that, because without that, you can't really have an impact with the best policy that you might have thought up. So I'd say that was one of the things. And then the how, even the theoretical courses were done. it's all about teamwork. So we had so many problem sets that, and I think that was a core aspect that during the 2-year course of studies, I worked in, I don't know, 20 teams at least, if not more, always together with different people with different perspectives trying to solve a problem, because that's in the end what public policy and practicing public policy is about. It's problem solving with others. So teamwork was the other thing.
Mark, would you like to add?
Excellent. Let me just build on what Clara said, because I think that was a really important intervention. It's not just about opening up a book. I mean, I think in terms of what you get at a policy school, this teamwork element, I think, is something that runs throughout a policy school. When you're done, you're going to end up working in different environments where you're working with other people. How do you solve different sorts of problems in those settings? How do you deal with conflicts within teams? I often have, for example, a debrief at the end where I have the students not just present their paper, but think about, okay, what worked, what didn't in terms of the teamwork? What sorts of things could we do with this? When you mentioned skills, I had a former student come back, give a talk in my class. He's now a lobbyist for a very big German company in both Brussels and in Berlin. That's his job. And I asked, he's been out for 10 years, and I asked him, what did you learn? What was most important? How does that help what I do? He didn't say some big theoretical idea. What he ended up saying is, you forced me to write these 2-page memos that were really disciplined, and my CEO loves those. Others talk way too much and don't get to the point. Now, is that really a master skill? I mean, there is a side of me that looks at this and says, even a good undergraduate program could probably give you this. But I think what you get at a policy school is, well, there's a focus again on solving these problems and doing it in a way that others understand it. There's an element of communication too. It's not just learning the big ideas, it's how to communicate those ideas. And he ended up talking to my students and said, okay, you might think this assignment is not much fun or whatever, but that's something you really have to do. And so I think the skills too, it's thinking about how you succeed in the world after you're done. It's not just what you learn while you're there.
And maybe one last thought that came up into my mind, it's the network. So it's also the parties that you have at after the end of the semester. It's the trips that you do together. It's this network that you then form that then you have lifelong, and that will help you and, the next ones, and that is with you for life. And that's also, in the end, what public policy is a lot about. It's, networks of people across sectors coming together and solving problems, as I said.
So it appears to me that public policy as a discipline is being discovered as we speak. I mean, there are newer and newer dimensions being added because it draws a lot from what's happening in practice. In some ways, what's happening on the field. And a lot of that comes into the classroom, and there's a lot of intellectual osmosis going on. So, for instance, Public Policy Festival is indeed a learning experience for public policy, unlike it would be for any other discipline, perhaps. But then the question that comes to my mind is, and let me ask this from the students here, how many of you involve yourself in a public policy project in a group, like working with people? All right, and how many of your disciplines, the studies that you're doing in public policy or even otherwise, are kind of, individual effort and exercise, like your assignments are by and large your own individual exercise. All right, so that's good. So in a way, this group experience, group exercises in public policy matters because you have to build networks and you have to engage with people, number of other people. So here's a little bit of a statistic. There's a research that was being done by one of my students. According to the AICT, that is All India Council for Technical Education data, there are 29 institutes in India which offer public policy programs, out of which 17 are private, out of 29. 4 are semi-private and 8 are state-funded, like public institutions. And the batch size generally is ranging from 20 to 60. The more interesting thing is, most of these institutes have really emerged in the last 5 or 10 years. But I'll come to that in a minute. But in addition to that, when we did, so we pulled out the subjects that are taught in these public policy programs, and we realized that more than 53% of the subjects come from humanities, around 16% from management, and then a quarter of the subjects come from different streams like science and technology, policy case studies, analysis, seminars. Would you have any thought on how could this curriculum, because these curricular structures are getting evolved as we speak, definitely in India, what are the type of courses or coursework or case studies, practice-based assignments that students can engage in while they are studying, in their respective universities and colleges to become more practice oriented. Because for a long time, this has been one of the criticisms of Indian higher education system is that a lot of it is text driven, which doesn't happen. I mean, cannot happen in MBA schools and should not happen in public policy schools as well. So are there some sort of thoughts that you'd like to add in terms of what could many of these students do in addition to doing their coursework to become better in public policy, understanding public policy, engaging with it? Yeah, Mark, why don't you
I'll
start
this,
and
we'll,
then...
we'll go back and forth.
Yeah.
I think I have a very simple suggestion, and I think you should simply volunteer. I mean, you should go work if I don't know what your passion is, and that's another thing we should always talk about, which is why are you studying in the first place? But if you're interested, for example, in healthcare policy, go volunteer at a hospital. There's this phrase that comes from the UK I very much appreciate, which is being at the coalface. And the idea here is getting your hands dirty with the data, really working with people in a certain field. Vijayendra Roy yesterday was talking a bit about, why don't you just go talk to the people? I mean, the statistics is great. And ultimately, when you go to a policy school, you'll be able to analyze things quite well. But often you just need to really engage with people, not just with your books, but with people themselves. And so at this stage, especially if you're getting mostly theory, and bio theory is also good, but if you're just getting theory, go volunteer.
Clara, would you like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think just building on that, if it's a 2-year program, you have that summer in between, that's a great moment to really even have a job that enables you to explore something practical. So going, for example, what I did is I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I went to Cambodia and I did 2 different things. I was a leadership resident in a dorm for young women. And by day, I was studying the rice value chain and figuring out what could agribusiness solutions be, and interviewed like everyone, from farmers to the Miller Association to, the people selling the rice. And I kind of did my own research project because I kind of needed to do that. That would be one thing. The other thing is think of your extracurricular engagement. That's also a way where you can explore different different areas of interest and also meet other people, because sometimes it's about collaborations. It also depends what. Sometimes you can also initiate something. So there's a lot of student initiatives around let's do a social entrepreneurship competition, or let's do some kind of challenge. And then there's also the university that can structure these things, right? So what we had in our second year, and everyone had to do this, it was a simulation. So they kind of simulated, and interestingly enough, we had a pandemic. That was our thing. And we had to quickly kind of come up with, a solution to so some of it, the academic curriculum can enable, or the structure of the MPP course, and some is really your own initiative.
Thanks. I think this is important. In public policy, my own students, and I would imagine both for Clara and Mark as well, you learn a lot by your internships, your experiences that you do in your organizations, and so on and so. So for the students here, that's definitely important. I'll give an interesting insight. Last semester in my class, this is the assignment I gave them. I gave them a list of various policies that the government of India or Maharashtra has promulgated. And I told them, surely there must be somebody coming to clean your house, somebody who's driving your car. Get one of them, avail that policy. So you go to the government department with them, get their Aadhaar card registered, get their account opened. And when you face this, so there is a policy on the government website. There's a policy these are the steps you have to follow in order to avail a certain benefit the government is providing. And there's another thing altogether, when you go to the field and realize that people are probably not being cooperative, or they are being cooperative, and that really became their learning. They don't remember classes as much as what they really did in the But anyway, but here's an interesting thing. Mark, you've spent time in US, and now you're in Germany, of course, in Hertie. And Clara, you've been in Canada, in Germany, and you've also been in India. What is your take on India and India's interest in public policy? You've been observing it from distance, you've been visiting, you're definitely teaching Indian students. There were Indian students perhaps in your class as well. And Mark, by the way, yesterday was telling me how number of students applying to Hertie from India has gone up significantly in the last few years. So what is your what is the level of how bullish you are on India or India's public policy aspirations, definitely from the young people?
Well, I just have to say I was really impressed over the last 2 days. I think this I was surprised, to be honest, about how how much people really care about data-driven, evidence-driven policymaking that works, that is economical, that has results for India, and this kind of commitment and also seriousness of debate and also critical conversation is something that you don't. I mean, I was impressed. I don't see that all the time in Germany either, where I'm currently based, and the type of debate and dialogue that is happening here is exactly, I think, yeah, what should continue. I mean, I myself am not in the public policy academic environment on a day-to-day basis, so I'm saying this from a kind of an outside-in perspective, but I say more of this should.
And you were in India in 2002, 3, 4, around that time, and since then, by now, like you see a significant difference in terms of Indians' interest in public policy, like public discourse.
Yeah, and I think confidence. I mean, I think, and this is important. I think the way India is talking about itself has changed so much in such a good way. And just to see the progress and the development, I mean, it's incredible. So a lot to be proud of. At the same time, I love the critical nature of people in India, thanks to the democratic nature of things. So there's always this, like, we're not just going to rest on our laurels now. There's always more. There's always something that's wrong that could be fixed. So that attitude is the right one. So,
you know, Amartya Sen did not write argumentative Indian for nothing. So surely that you'll get a lot. I get in my classes as well. Mark, would you like to add?
Yeah. I can only supplement a compliment because Clara already said many important things. I think the enthusiasm I see, curiosity, a sense that there are many problems that have to be solved, and coming from Germany, I should add the US, I get a sense sometimes there things are almost frozen. Right, so there's a can-do. The U.S. has a little bit of this can-do spirit, but it's interestingly enough, I find it even more here. Sort of, okay, there's an issue. What do we do about it? Right? How do we get? Do we go around it? Do we go head on? Whatever we do, but there's a sense also of some things do need to be changed without being too defensive about change. I mean, I should say this is all anecdotal. I'm not. As somebody actually does a lot of quantitative work, I'm a little nervous to give you my anecdotal impressions, I should add. But that's what I at least sense. I would add one more thing, though, that is a bit different. And I think we heard this on the last panel. I think India is simply becoming more important in the world. I mean, it has something to do with the growth in GDP. It has something to do, I would add also some of the discussions in terms of discourses, narratives, and ideas that come from India. And I think it's important that there are more and more discussions here. And I think that kind of sense of importance has led to it being taken more seriously here. Again, I don't have concrete data on this. This is maybe a hypothesis or a speculation. But when you talk and you say, what are the powers that matter? And this goes back to 20 years ago. India was maybe there someplace. Now even, especially in Germany, what is happening in India and German policy towards India is important.
I mean, and the G20 leadership of India was you didn't hear about the G20 the years before. Like, this was a landmark G20. Lots of really important resolutions were done thanks to also the leadership here. So, like, just in general, the seriousness taken to hosting this was there. And I'm not being political in any sense in this way. I just the way the platform was used was good.
Yeah, no, I think definitely a lot of these things have added to the interest in public policy in India. So I sit on the Academic Council of Indian School of Public Policy, and when we set it up in 2019, it was amazing, absolutely amazing to see that we had so many more applications. And this is a one-year program which does not give a degree. Within Flame, you know, the year I joined, 2 years ago, there were 3 or 4 students wanting to do public policy major. Now there are more than 15, and there are even larger number of students wanting to do public policy minor. And I would imagine this is going on in definitely in Hertie, right? Number of Indian students applying. How big is your class in terms of Indian students, Mark? like of all the total ballpark figure, like, and has changed?
There's some of our students who are here right now that would know better than I, so I'm just going to speculate. But this has something to do with, I would say around 40-ish, 40 to 45, something like this. But
Wow.
Nitish would know the exact number.
And is this the largest non-German population in your school?
Yeah. Yes, and I should say we have a 2-year program. So when I give that number, I'm referring only to the entering class. We also have almost double that for the class after that.
Well, fun question. How many of them are engineers?
Well, I don't know the statistics. I can tell you, though, that some are. And I also find it a really interesting question because I think I can take it back to your first question towards me about public policy. That is, engineers have a certain training that makes, in terms of thinking about how the world works and fits in different sorts of ways, really smart in terms of developing things. But at the same time, I think when you get the public policy angle, you can take that training and apply it to public policy problems that you wouldn't do in a traditional engineering program.
So here, this is also another question, which do folks who do public policy in the States or in Germany, do they have engineering background mostly, or are they social science majors moving to public policy? Because you can already guess the answer for India. Yeah.
I mean, it's a mix, but I think many have studied political science before. I'd say that would be a very common path if it's their second degree, but you probably know better than I do.
I think my sense, I think you're right, which is you get more sort of political science, maybe sociology, things like this in the US. Having said that, one of the things that's really interesting with our first year students is they come in with some sort of expertise, but they don't know much about the rest. So someone might be an economist. And so we do offer an advanced course for those that come in as economists to kind of build on this. But nonetheless, there's one course that's sort of easy. I'll put that in quotes. But then they also have to take law. And what economist has thought about law before, right? It pushes them intellectually in interesting ways. It's the reverse. Almost all lawyers don't study numbers. No offense to any lawyers here, but that's just the way it is. Suddenly, they have to do this, and they're challenged by this, right? Now, if the engineers that come in, the courses that are more numbers-based and the like, they do quite well. But again, the policy is going to push them in other ways. And I think it's exciting for a lot of students. That's why they come.
Yeah, so I mean, in India, there are a number of engineers who choose to do public policy afterwards, which brings me to and I think we'll probably take a break here in terms of, and invite many others, because I think many of these students will have questions on public policy, learning and practice. But here's the last one. Do you think a public policy degree in public policy is necessary to be a good public policy practitioner? And if not, then, I mean, this is a question that people ask about MBA and, to be a good businessman. But how important is this? Because this degree is relatively new in India and definitely in other parts of the world. Kennedy has been there for the longest time, perhaps, but most public policy schools are very new. So, how many of us here have a degree or are doing a degree program majoring in public policy? Majoring in public policy, this is a significant number. But I think more than half don't have it. I don't have it. Mark, you don't have a degree in public policy. So I think, is there something that a degree in public policy does which otherwise can't be done for successful career, let's say?
I don't think so. I think there are different ways of getting together, because I think basically what a public policy degree is it's a kind of multidisciplinary, multi-skills MBA for, making society better. So you can actually piece those puzzle pieces together in different ways. It could be through an experience working in a company, plus an experience working in a government ministry, plus working in an NGO, and together you kind of get your self-made MVP. So I think there's different ways of getting to, so I don't think you have to have done a master's in public policy in order to,
But do firms, and because you're in the industry, do firms expect when they're hiring somebody for a certain role in public policy to have people done a degree or majored or minored in public policy, like in the industry, globally? Not as much.
I think in any case, in the end, it's about your ability to critically think, your ability to, analyze and triangulate across qualitative and quantitative data, communicating your insights well, which you can do through many different ways. And I'd also argue it's sometimes the stuff that you do besides your official degree that end up shaping you and preparing you for what's to come. Yeah, not to belittle MPPs at all. It's a great degree, but I think you can get that through many different ways.
I'm going to defend MPP a little bit, even though I don't have that degree. This is a bit of an irony here, right? I think in terms of what this is, maybe that's the reason why. Let me go back to this lobbyist I mentioned, who now still works in Brussels and in Berlin. And we talk about his degree. We also talk about, by the way, engineers. If you work for an automotive firm, he mostly deals with engineers. And keep in mind, the automotive industry is the most important industry in Germany. And one of his comments was, the engineers do not understand these discussions about, for example, electronic vehicles. And indeed, he works for a company that has both sort of petrol and electric vehicles, right? So they're kind of on both sides. And if you think about, do you want quote unquote green legislation? Well, if you're really good on the electric side, you might be very much in favor of certain regulations for firms because it helps get rid of your competitors who maybe only do petrol. But when you talk about how these things are played and how the policy process runs in both places, he says the engineers in the company just have no idea why something comes from someplace. They get angry about it. They don't know how to react to it. And he says, no, calm down, calm down. This is how we play off the different dimensions. This is how we form alliances and agreements with other firms, because indeed, these firms are quite important. It's how we sometimes even reach out to the environmental lobby, who you might think would be our biggest enemy, but actually in some things, they're really good friends. Because as these games are played in Brussels, we have to get this set. And he would tell you, it's my MPP degree that allows me to see both how the policy process works, but also I'm not just that political science type. I also have this other training to understand how things work as well. And that allows me to succeed in a company environment. So it's only an anecdote. It's a case where I think it might matter, but I think it's an interesting one.
No, I think I agree with you in a way. So there is a certain type of thinking which is public policy. So is there a public policy way of thinking? And I think someone who's been working in this field for a while, I think there is. So so one imagination is that the circumference of the knowledge that you gain in your undergraduate program, whichever it is. If I take away the boundary, the border of it, and keep it fluid. So in other words, you don't have to win a debate in public policy. You have to ensure that a consensus is reached, and that requires a certain because you need to get the job done, get the deal done, get people to agree to a common cause, and that I think requires a different type of thinking, which traditional disciplines might provide only so much. But I think. Maybe we should stop here and perhaps ask the audience if they have questions for you, because I know there are so many of them who will. Oh, great! So there is So should we start with the gentleman here, and then I go anti-clockwise? And please keep your questions really brief. Would you like to ask your question first, sir? Yeah.
Cool, thank you so much. So my question is essentially, so we have three schools of thought, right? We have Harvard, we have Hertie, and we have Flame. So out of these three, I was just talking to this person, and they were telling me about how every country, you pursuing public policy in every particular country has its own advantages, right? Because public policy is more of a cultural and a geography specific venture you get into. On that note, so I'm an Indian. I study at Flame University under Prof. Yugank. But then my question is, suppose if I were to apply to Harvard or say Hertie, but I want to pursue my career back in India, am I losing something in pursuing my master's in the US or in Germany rather than pursuing my master's in public policy back in India?
This is a great question. Should we collect a few and then perhaps pick? Yeah, all right. So we can go to the gentleman behind.
Hello. So, do you think my question is that since Germany is just rising in the public policy sphere in this field, so do you think that Germany can be a good alternative to those world superpowers that have been dominating this?
All right. This is an interesting question to come to this panel, but thanks a lot for that. The lady over there.
I'll keep it very brief.
Thanks.
So, the world scenario currently is pretty tumultuous. but it's been like this for a while. The only thing that's been added is maybe the deteriorating climate situation, right? So do you think this, with the advent of the 20th century, we've seen this increasing interest in public policy, not just in India, but worldwide, and you've been witnesses to it. Do you think this is sort of distress-driven interest because the political leadership seems to be lacking at places when it comes to solving issues, right? So do you think people are sort of like, this is just not working out, maybe we should sort of get into the public policy domain and start doing this ourselves?
Thanks. Maybe take one more and then we go for the next round later. Yeah, the lady over there behind you. Yeah, thanks.
Hi. Yeah, so I've completed my doctoral degree in public policy from the US, and we speak about it being a very multidisciplinary field, but what I've observed, at least there, is the dominance of economists. And so standing here, I just want to ask...
Did you say US? Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Sorry,
in the United States. And so I just want to understand what your thoughts are on the multidisciplinarity and the importance of that.
I think we can get some responses from you, Clara, and then Mark, you, and maybe then we can go to another round of some questions. Clara, would you like to respond to some of them?
Sure. So I'll kind of do a little bit of a tour. So I'll start with the last question. Yes, I agree. There has been a total dominance of the public policy world by economists of late. If you don't do an RCT, nothing, it's whatever, it isn't valid. But there's a change that I'm sensing, and that there's more and more an emphasis also on other, like anthropology and kind of more of those, I'll just, softer, it's the wrong word, but of alternative approaches again. And this brings me back to the point of answering to the other question where you were saying, talking about, the increased interest in public policy. I think there is, the pendulum is shifting since after the financial crisis, 2008, 2009, there's gradually been a re-interest of, before that people were all into, let's do private sector. Private sector is the answer to everything. I think we're seeing the pendulum shift again and seeing that actually government does have a role to play. Regulation can be helpful. Policy can be helpful. Government investment can help. So in that sense, that's probably one of the we're observing kind of that interest in public policy in line with that pendulum shift. Also, people are, more interested in issues again. They're going to the streets again on climate change. So there's more activism, so to say. And then first question around here, around Germany, the role of Germany. So I think Germany does have a role to play in public policy. So I think so. Germany has a few, and maybe Europe more broadly has a big role to play in advancing the field of public policy. In particular, I just say regulation, right? Europe is the powerhouse of coming up with regulations, right? From personal protection to et cetera. And they're so, they have had to negotiate creating regulations across the 20 plus European states. So if there's one superpower that Europe has, it's regulations. I think that's where German schools of public policies can contribute.
Mark, you'd like to pick up some of those questions?
Yeah, I kind of pick and choose, but again, try to simply build on what Clara said. Why do a degree in Germany or why do a degree in the US? I would encourage Germans to come to India and Indians to go to Germany. I mean, I think one thing that you get also at a policy school is sort of the comparative method, where you think about how do things work elsewhere and can I apply that at home? Now, does it work elsewhere? You might also learn things that don't work well. You might also get beyond some of your stereotypes. I can tell you, as an American looking at Germany, I often thought before I went there and spent a lot of time there, so these stereotypes about discipline, everything works on time. I got to tell you, I think the trains now are only 65% on time. It drives me crazy. I love the trains. As an American, we're all car focused. I think it's great to have public transportation, but boy, the German public transportation system is just driving me crazy. If I think about flying into an airport, I had a ticket for a flight into a new airport in Berlin in 2011. Clara will know what I'm talking about. That airport didn't open until 2020. They had so many problems with how they did investments. I've heard discussions here about how to increase investment in India. If you want to look at bad cases, come to Germany. Okay? And as I say that, you're going to get something that's going to be applicable here, right? And often these issues are complex. And why did it not work? You're going to learn something from it. Now, the role of Germany, I just gave you some interesting examples. I think Clara said something that's important, which is there's a European dimension to this. It's not just Germany anymore. I think that's also interesting, by the way, how we used to talk and think only at country level. And for those of you who study an international affairs master, things like this, how does the European Union play into this? And indeed, as she said, a lot of regulation really comes from Brussels these days. That's why that lobbyist I mentioned spends so much more time actually now in Brussels than in Berlin. I think that's a really interesting sort of dimension. And I think the way the world looks, you can kind of get this. I've heard this, some discussions actually on the last panel a bit, where the Europeans increasingly feel, well, if we look west, there's the US, but the US is becoming really focused on itself, like we saw in the 30s, perhaps. If we look east, we've got China, and yeah, we make money there, but things aren't working. So where are we here? I think it's an interesting sort of opportunity also for India and for Europe. That's not one of your questions, but it's something I wanted to say. Political leadership, yes, it can be lacking, but I think as long as there's been government, people have been complaining about political leadership. I also liked in the last panel this emphasis on you need to learn more, become better educated, and I want to stress the role of the citizens in that, right? I mean, there's something you can do, and I think that's also something that comes from this, and that's why you should do it yourselves. I hope I get 2 more minutes, 2 more sentences. I'll wait till the music dies down because I know what that means. It's kind of ominous, especially if you cut off an academic, but that's an aside as well. The final comment was on the dominance of economists. I'm going to give you, like a good academic, a pitch, because I'm working on a book with Joachim Wehner where we look at economists as policymakers. Does it matter if you have an economist instead of somebody else, as say finance minister, central banker, and the like? And all I'll say is they have certain sets of skills that are great for analysis. They lack, and I think this follows on what Clara said, they often lack a lot of skills too. If I think of management skills and other sorts of things. And it's a mixed bag. There are wonderful things that economists, I'm sitting, by the way, I think at an economics institute, I better be careful. But there's some great things that economists do and why we want economists around. But indeed, we see, I think, especially in the 90s, early 2000s, there was a lot of belief in economists. And to cite the Queen of England, how did you get this wrong when she was thinking about the financial crisis? I think the financial crisis and other things got to the stage of economists matter, but there are others that matter too.
In 2015, there was an article in American Economic Review. The title of the article was The Superiority of Economists. And what they did, and it's a brilliant piece I can send to some of you. What they did is they're looking at a number of things in terms of how much do these earn, people who get out of these jobs. But they're looking at academics who are economists and seeing how many papers do they publish and how many of them are entered in disciplines outside economics, how many of them have co-authors who are not economists. And the answer is it's a pretty insular discipline. And so it's interesting that you're asking this because, so the argument of the article is that because it's insular in a way, is therefore contributes to it being, they feel there is a superiority complex that economists have. But that kind of, as Mark rightly mentioned, is not the most desirable for public policy. And the other question in terms of rise, every generation feels that theirs was a better generation than the future generation in terms of even political generation. So we think that, the political class lacks, but I think every generation has felt that their own political classes lack. I think an interesting thing that has happened in the last 15 years is the rise of social media, which has led a huge amount of citizen active, advocacy and active citizenry to take place. And I think that could be, another idea to look at. To the first question, I think it's important that at least one of your degrees you do in the jurisdiction where you want to practice. But it's also about human nature. Like if at the core of it, public policy is to understand human nature, which could differ from communities to communities. But by and large, there are some fundamental truths. German delays in German infrastructure could also be attributed to essentially some aspects of human nature. When British came to India, one of the things that they hated were cobras. So back in the days, they announced a policy in order to kill so they wanted to kill all the cobras. And one of the policies that they announced is, well, you bring a cobra and get some money out of it. So they put a bounty on cobra. And as many folks think in the world, India is a country of snake charmers. So if you incentivize killing of cobras, people will kill cobras. Guess what happened? Indians kill cobras. Indians started breeding cobras. So you have more cobras in India. And in public policy, this is called as the cobra fallacy, which comes out of the colonial experience of this country. The point is, there is an innate human nature to respond to incentives. And by and large, if you learn that across jurisdictions, it's going to be desirable. Perhaps we can take one or two more questions, and then the music is on. So I was just hoping the music. All right. So it was. This is the. But I think it's been great. Thanks a lot. I personally learned a lot chatting with both of you, Mark, Clara, and I think that I would say the same thing on behalf of the audience. Thank you so much for being a wonderful patient listener.
Thank you for your
all the best, and keep you around today.